It's been a few weeks, but welcome back to Beetlejuice. That's where I'm working on my Beetlejuice project for August, September, and probably October because I didn't get very much done this month. In this video, I'm going to be working on Juno's filing cabinets. My Beetlejuice project for this year has been Juno's office, and what is an office without some filing cabinets and a bunch of files and paperwork. I'm going to be making 4 total filing cabinets, a lot of mess on top of the cabinets, so let's go ahead and get started. This is a kit that is available in my store, which is open the 1st through the 15th of each month. However, I also released this as a free pattern, which you can find in a previous Beetlejuice video, which I will link in the description box below. I typically despise making multiples of the same thing, but when I do, I try to do it more as an assembly line where I'm doing the same step over and over again instead of completing one entire cabinet and then moving on to the other one. I find my brain works a little bit better that way. I don't feel like I'm constantly backtracking. I'm just doing the same step 4 times instead of making 4 separate cabinets. It's the same amount of work, but for some reason, this works for me. If you do want to see detailed instructions on how these go together, those are in that linked video I previously mentioned. For now, I'm just putting together the bodies so you can see how it's all starting from the beginning. I then had to make even more drawers that were all similar, so I did that. Thankfully, I'm not having to make all of the drawers. Only some of the drawers are going to be pulled out from the cabinet, and the rest of them are going to be individual pieces that are just glued onto the cabinet front. Because I knew this month was going to be incredibly busy and I wasn't going to get many videos out, I decided to do a live stream where I painted the cabinets I just built. It was a really fun stream and I got a lot of great suggestions, so if you want to watch it and see all the comments, I will leave a link for that stream in the description box below. I'm going to edit in some of that footage so you don't have to go watch it if you don't want to, but you can kind of see how I did the painting process. I started the stream by sanding the fake drawer fronts that are going to cover up the holes in between the actual working drawers. I like to give my drawers a bit of a rounded edge. Then I could remove the movable drawers to make sure that there wasn't any excess glue that would glue them shut. Then I could start mixing up the paint for all the cabinets, which ended up being a little bit of a problem. Man, I am having a hard... Okay, I'm going to take down the green gel light because I am having a hard time seeing the color. Hold on a second. It's no longer green in here. I can't tell what color I'm mixing. Okay, it's more of like a tan. My overall plan was to make the color of each filing cabinet just a little bit different. The reason for this being that I wanted it to look like the cabinets were added into her office at different points in time, so they didn't all match. They were just kind of taken from other places and added in as her client list got longer and longer. So I kept the same bowl of paint and just added in different colors to make them a different shade of basically a putty color. This one is a bit more green and the other ones are more tan. It was a very detailed process. A big blob. I made sure to not only paint the cabinet body, but also to paint the drawers because the paint was essentially being destroyed each time I mixed a new color, and it was going to be very difficult to go back and try to match the original paint color. So I just had to make sure I was completely done with the painting process before I moved on. So let me show you the colors we have here. Everything's mostly dry. So they're all just slightly different. And let's put the green thing back up and see if we can even tell the difference once I add that. Oh yeah, you can still tell they're a little different. So I think that was worth the time. I think it's okay. I allowed the cabinets to continue to dry and then I moved on to some paperwork. This is just computer paper that I'm cutting down into 1 inch by 3/4 inch segments and I'm going to start stacking them up. I scrunched them a little bit. This is going to give them more volume. And then I had to make sure to add some more Beetlejuice flyers, which I used in another part of the project. These are going to be stuffed into the drawers and stacked up on top of the filing cabinets to really make everything look like a huge mess. As I said previously, I got a ton of great comments in this live stream. One of them was to switch some of the drawers to make it look like the drawers had been moved around and not put away correctly. Another one was to have a drawer completely missing and to use the green cabinet for Beetlejuice files only, which makes sense that Juno may have quite a bit of information on him after all these years. I then stuck the drawers permanently in place. I do not want them to be movable because I will be stuffing them full of paperwork and I don't want the papers to fall out. After the live stream, I was able to finish up some of the details on the cabinets themselves and then move on to the messy paperwork. Just as I did for Juno's desk in a previous video, I used triple thick glaze on the top of these cabinets to give them a little bit more of a metallic look once they're finished. You still can see a few of the brush strokes, but overall it gives it a shiny appearance, which filing cabinets would have. And I can move on to the details such as the handles and the little name markers that stick onto the front of the drawers. I'm going to paint them in place on my sheet because it's just a little bit easier and I know I won't lose them. I measured out a yellow square that told me how much room I had inside of the labels and then printed off a bunch of labels that I thought would make sense on the front of the filing cabinets. One entire cabinet is going to have Beetlejuice across the front, which I know is very dangerous. We will be taking care of that. And the rest of them will have the alphabet and the word other and the word forms. I tried to make it look as if Juno was crossing out his name, trying to make sure there weren't 3 of his name in a row. Of course, I don't know if you can write it or if it has to be said verbally. It's not quite outlined in the movie, but I thought it was a fun detail and those who are really looking close might find it funny. Then I could cut out all of the labels and get them ready to go onto the drawer fronts. The Beetlejuice cabinet is the one that has the missing drawer, so I made sure to add that label to the drawer off to the side. And then of course I had to switch the 2 labels on the 2 colored drawers that switched cabinet bodies. So it's just fun little details like that that I enjoy, but I don't know if anyone will ever notice if they didn't know that was there. Then I could paint the handles and apply those as well. I have one falling off in the bottom left-hand corner, but the rest of them are applied pretty regularly. Another detail in my cardstock sheet that comes in with the kit are these little file folders. I'm using a mixture of brown and orange watercolor paint to go over the top of these. I'm going to let that dry completely and it's going to give me a manila folder look just like this once they're dry. I'm going to put those off to the side and I'm going to fill them a little bit later. First, I need to age the cabinets. Instead of trying to use watered down acrylic paint like I did for Juno's desk, it didn't really work that well. I'm just going to be using straight brown paint and a small detail brush to touch it to the edge of the cabinets. This is going to make it look like in some places the paint has chipped off and it's started to rust. So I really like this detail. It does take a while to do all those little tiny dabs of paint, but I do think it was worth it in the end for the result I was able to achieve. And just for the Beetlejuice cabinet itself, I'm going to do the same thing with a little bit of green paint to just mimic goo, some kind of goo that's coming out of this cabinet. Now it's time to add some of the paperwork. This was the stack of papers that I created during the live stream, and it fits perfectly in the forms folder, and it has quite a few colors in there, so it looks like it has a yellow form, a pink form, so that's going to be great for that filing cabinet drawer. The rest of the drawers are going to be mostly filled with the file folders, so I need to fill them up with paper. I didn't do anything special to the paper except fold it in half and then add glue in between each of the sheets. I don't want them to be too full, so I'm really only adding maybe 3 or 4 folded sheets of paper into each one. Once that's done, I can add the folders together. I used my pencil just to make a little mark that looks like maybe a scribbled name on the file folder, and then made sure I had enough so that it would fill the open drawer slot. And I just did that as I went for each and every drawer. The bottom drawer on the green cabinet was pretty open, and so I was afraid it would be difficult for me to get the file folders standing up and not have to fight against them trying to fall back inside the drawer. So before I began putting files inside, I stuffed it with some paper towel so I had something for the files to push against. And then one by one, I could add the files into the open drawer. As I said, this is going to have the most stuff in it, so I made sure to add another Beetlejuice flyer, which just seems to be plaguing poor Juno outside of her office and inside all of her drawers. And though we've already done so much to these filing cabinets, there is still much more to go, including a very special book. One of the fantastic suggestions from the live stream was to create a giant pile of the handbook for the recently deceased. This makes a lot of sense for a place like Juno's office because she is a caseworker for the recently deceased. So it makes sense that she may have a few extra copies, either copies that were left in her office by mistake or ones that she has on hand to give to those of her clients that don't have theirs anymore or lost it, or maybe someone stole it. I showed a picture of my handbooks on the community tab, and a few people said they wanted to make one of their own, so I am going to be leaving a very simple free pattern with the cover of the book in the description box below if you want to make one of your own. But now I need to make quite a few. I am going to be using laser cut mat board for the inside of my book to create the book pages, but you can really use anything you want. If you want to stack up individual sheets of paper, or if you want to use wood, just make sure it matches the size in my PDF pattern and you should be good to go. I printed out enough covers to go with the amount of mat board that I had, and in the end it still felt like it wasn't enough books. Books just take so long to create. Once I glued my mat board together, I sanded the sides. Because of the laser cut process, it kind of burns the edges, and sanding makes it look more like book pages. Then I glued it to the side that has the cover of the book, because if there's any excess that I need to cut off, I want to make sure I'm cutting off the back side of the book and not the front cover. I glued it down, I let it dry for a little bit, and then I added more glue to the back edge of the book pages and then to the side that's going to glue to the back of the book. This was my first test book, and then I realized pretty quickly that I did not like the white edge that you could see all around the inside of the book. I did have to cut off a tiny sliver of paper. I didn't have to do this on all of them, it just kind of depended on how I glued in my book pages. But overall, the sizing worked really well. Now that I have it done, I want to do something different with these white edges of the paper. So I grabbed some acrylic markers that my sister got me for this past Christmas. I hadn't used them yet. I hadn't thought of something to use them for, but it turned out this is going to be the perfect project. I think they're supposed to be like acrylic paint markers, and this brand seemed to work really well. It had a brush nib on one side and a bullet nib on the other. I lifted the paper up a little bit so that I could see through it to see where the book covers were, and then I traced around the edges. Then I went back with the brush nib and went all around the outside, so once it's applied with the paper on the inside, it will look as though the brown cover continues all the way to the inside of the book. I followed the same exact steps before, and then once everything was glued down, I used the same paint marker to cover up the edges of the white paper. I think this is such a small detail. It's an easy detail to do, but it really makes a difference on how your book ends up looking. It doesn't look like cut paper. Here's an example of the before and after. I think it just gives it a little bit more realism. However, I am going to put these into a big pile, so not all of them need to look realistic, although I did follow all the same steps for each book. Now that I have a big pile of books, I needed to create another big pile of file folders with papers inside of them. I did this exactly the same way as I did before when I was putting them into the drawers, except this time I was making them individually. I did not glue them together because I need to figure out how they're going to look when they're stacked on top of the filing cabinets. I want these to seem like folders that were pulled out for Juno's use, and then she was just too busy to put them back into the right place. Some of the folders were a little neater, some of them had papers coming out at weird angles. At this point, I also had to think about forced gravity, and by that I mean I had to bend some of the files so they looked a bit more droopy when they were sitting on top of each other. The paper doesn't have a lot of weight when it's this small, but if it was a large file folder, it would bend over time, or it would have something that it was drooping over. So I had to force some of my files to curve. I wanted to add a few books in between. And then I remembered another great suggestion from the live stream, which was to add some makeshift ashtrays around with the filing cabinets. So those are going to be objects that aren't meant to be ashtrays, but kind of turn into them because the Juno was just too lazy to go find an actual ashtray or to empty hers out. Once I had all of my miniatures made and gathered, I could start gluing them on permanently. Here you can really see the curve of the files where I forced them to look like they're just a little bit heavier than they are. And then I glued the mug in place and of course added another Beetlejuice flyer. I will be adding some ash and a cigarette into this mug a little bit later, but for now I'm going to continue adding details to my filing cabinets. The inside of this missing drawer area is going to be stuffed with the books that I just made. Now, before I can start stuffing this area, I am going to have to make some kind of platform inside because, as you know, it is actually empty on the inside and I don't want to have to fight a bunch of books falling down inside of the cabinet. So once that was dry, I decided to stuff this area of the filing cabinet with a paper towel as well. I used some glue and I just kind of dropped it in place. It's not going to be a full coverage amount of glue. It's just a couple drops to make sure that this paper towel isn't moving inside of my cabinet once the books are dry. I added a little bit more glue and some more paper towel until I felt like there was enough room to add detail, but not to where the pieces would be falling back inside of the cabinet. I started by adding a file folder underneath, so maybe these were files that used to go into this drawer and they just kind of got put down inside of the cabinet, and then I could individually add each book on top of those file folders. There is a process to making things look haphazard. It's kind of funny. You have to sit there and like, how do I make this look like someone just threw these in there without making them look too organized? But I do think I figured it out. I like how they look. I have some of them going horizontally and a couple going vertically so that you can see the pages and you can see the cover of the book. And of course, I had to add in another flyer that's been shoved in between the books themselves. So this is how the specialty cabinet is looking. I don't want to say his name too many times. I could get myself in trouble. What has it been, 8 times or so already? I do think it's funny that I'm adding the majority of these books to this cabinet as if it's Juno's way of just trying to, how do they say, throw the book at him? So that he would start following the rules because he just doesn't follow any of the rules at all. But I started stacking these books up on top, and I'm going to put another 2 mugs on the back part of this filing cabinet. In the end, you won't be able to see it very well, but it is detail that we know is there. I have a hard time rolling paper really tightly, so I decided to see if I could cut a paper stick Q-tip down and if that would make a decent cigarette, because I did know that these paper stems on these cotton swabs are rolled paper. So I cut a slit down the center of the rolled paper and then just carefully, without poking myself in the finger, started to unroll it until I got to a small enough size that it resembled a 1/12 scale cigarette to my eyes. This is me just kind of estimating. Once I got it down to the size I liked, I added a little bit of glue and let it roll back on itself and then cut off the excess. For me, this worked really well. I was really happy I didn't have to try and roll paper this small myself. Off camera, I added a little bit of Sharpie to the end to make it look as though it's burnt. And then I added a bit of red. This will either look like a graphic on the paper or a bit of lipstick from Juno. I made 3 of these to start out with, and then I'm going to mix some shaved chalk pastel onto a small piece of paper. This is going to be poured into the mug to make it look like a pile of ashes that's been building up over time. And I made it on a folded piece of paper so it's easier to pour. So now I can grab my filing cabinet. I am going to be filling this with hot glue because the hot glue will stay liquidy for a little bit of time, especially because I'm building it up into a small area. It will keep itself warm for a little bit. I'm making sure not to have any strings coming up because I want it to look completely flat. And then slowly and carefully, I'm using my tweezers to put the cigarettes into the cup. I made sure to bend one of them because I feel like whenever you see discarded cigarettes, they're always kind of bent up. And then I covered the remaining hot glue on the top with a little bit of the chalk pastel and then tapped the side of the filing cabinet to get it to move around all inside of the mug. This is going to stick to that hot glue and it's going to continue to cool off as I work around the bottom of the mug. I'm using some wood glue and then adding the rest of my chalk pastel on top of the wood glue. Finally, I can add my last cigarette bent and stuck to the side of the mug as if it was even tamped out into the top of the filing cabinet itself. This is how it looks once it's done. The chalk pastel naturally fell down the side of the cabinet and I just left it there. I did the same thing for the mugs on the green cabinet and I even left a little cigarette on top of the book and it does look as if it has burn marks in the cover. So these are my 2 areas with the makeshift ashtrays and I really love that detail. This is how the top of my other 2 cabinets came out. I did one with vertical files and another one with horizontal files laying down, both with a mixture of folders and books. And all together, I think they make quite a mess. A fun mess, however. I really enjoy looking at these. I think even though they're repeats of the same things, they're blank papers and files and books, I think they're enough to be interesting. And of course, they're not the main focus of the room. They're really just meant to be background details that kind of continue to tell the story of the space that we're in. But I did think of a fun miniature that I could add that was sent to me by my friend Billy, who is working on a Wonka project. He sent me a bunch of mini chocolate bars, and I thought this would be a fun thing to hide in Juno's cabinets. Where do you think Juno would hide a chocolate bar?
Maybe in between one of those files right there.
Okay.
But kind of like poking out.
So kind of like that?
Yeah.
Where we can still see the Wonka part? Like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Beetlejuice.
Good spot?
Yep.
I thought the Wonka bar would be such a fun addition because Tim Burton also did a version of Wonka. So thank you for sending those, Billy. Now that all of Juno's vices are in place, we can start putting in the filing cabinets with the rest of the furniture. And as I said, we have plenty of Beetlejuice flyers that match along with the pegboard I installed previously. I'm going to be adding the filing cabinets behind her desk on either side of this window, and I'm so very glad that I put the switch up a little higher because this was just a happy accident that it's high enough to be over the filing cabinets. I am so glad that didn't conflict because it's not even something I thought about. I am so very happy with how the filing cabinets are starting to fill up the space. It's starting to feel more cramped and more busy, which is the vibe that I want from Juno's office. And especially when I start getting characters in there, I just want you to feel like you have to kind of scoot around to get anywhere in there. It's not supposed to be a really inviting and open air space. It's supposed to be filled with paperwork and a little bit of anxiety and worry. Yeah, it's not supposed to be super pleasant at all. Obviously, I need to create quite a few more accessories for Juno's desk. It's looking very empty compared to the top of the filing cabinets. And I was thinking I was going to do that in this video until I got this package. This box is from Matthew Hackley, and if that name sounds familiar, that is the artist that created the robots for my Captain's Quarters project. Matthew reached back out to me and asked if it would be helpful if he created the people that are in the scene that you see behind the Maitlands from Juno's office. Obviously, I said yes, that would be amazing. And Matthew recently sent something specifically for the Addams family house, which I do have a few other projects I plan to create for that house now that it's back home, so I will be showing you that in the future. But for now, let's open up this box. Matthew's idea was to recreate these people as a relief sculpture. A relief is a sculpture that's still 3D, however, it's more flat, and usually the background is very flat. The people behind Adam and Barbara look like they're in some kind of stadium seating, so I really liked how Matthew did this. They look like they're sitting in the stadium, but it's still very flat compared to what it would be if all of the people were in 3D. So there is one 3D torso figure, and then the two skeletons and the woman are very flat as compared to what they would be. So this is a relief sculpture. Now the trick is I need to fit these into my project, and there isn't that much space behind the window, so we'll see. We will make accessories for Juno's desk in a later video. For now, I am just way too excited to get these people in place. And thank you, Matthew, for sending them. I did send over rough dimensions when the project first started, so Matthew had a little bit of an idea of the space there was to work with, but once things really start being built is when you can really see if things are going to fit. So what I'm going to do is add some tape to the back of this piece. It does need to be up high enough so that it can be seen through the window opening. And once I get the flat people in place, then I can figure out where the 3D torso is going to fit. I'm kind of working with a very thin pizza pie slice space behind the window, so I'm going to be moving things around until it looks right. So first, from my angle, it looked like I stuck it onto the wall straight, but it's very not straight. But that's okay. Nothing in this project is really straight up and down, but I did realize it was too high, so I moved it down, and this was the beginning of getting this piece put permanently into my project. It is going to be a little bit difficult to see because everything is painted with a flat black. Matthew did say that I could do the painting part to make sure that it matched the colors that worked with my project. But here you can see I'm trying to get a little light in there. It's very dark behind the window. Eventually there will be lighting back there. I used a couple blocks of wood to try and boost the torso up so I could see if it fit in the right spot. And it does fit behind the window wall, even if it is a little over to the side. Now I do have to unfortunately remove the very back row of seating so that there's a bit more room for the guy with the sunglasses to fit in front. Thankfully, there were no relief characters on that row, so I didn't feel too bad about having to remove this piece. That gave me a little extra room to make sure my sunglasses guy wasn't too close up to the window. This is how they're all going to fit within the window space, and I can see the woman from my angle, so it's going to be one of those pieces that you can kind of look around and you'll see different characters as you move your head around viewing Juno's office. I marked off where both the pieces were at, so when I come back to put them into this space, I don't have to figure all of that out again. But now it's time to paint. This is going to be a unique challenge because they all need to look somewhat like they're lit up with neon lights. I am going to have one light source in this area, but I want them all to look like they do in the movie. So I'm going to paint all of the bright areas first with a base coat of white. And for example, on his suit, I am leaving a line between the collar and the shirt so that you can see that they're two different pieces of clothing. It's a bit like trying to paint a cartoon. I painted his face with a pink color and set him to the side to dry. That's really all he's going to need because his suit is black. Moving on to the other characters, I'm first going to paint the really light places, again with a base coat of white. For example, the skeleton on the right is a very bright green, while the skeleton on the left is a more darker red, so I'm not going to be painting a base coat of white anywhere except for on his teeth, which are the shiniest part about him. The woman on the left is completely blue, and even though it looks like the whole scene is bathed in blue light, I want to force that look on her because I'm not going to be able to put a blue light on her and then a green light on the skeleton. I'm hoping I can just light them all up with white light and it still gives the same effect. I may paint the bleachers blue at some point, but I'm not going to worry about that until I get the lighting in place and can see it for myself. Once I'm ready to paint the skeleton, I'm adding the green right on top of my white base coat, and I'm hoping this is giving the neon effect that I'm going for. I think it is, especially against the black background. The fact that this was all sculpted as a relief sculpture made it so much easier to paint because really I am not defining things with paint. I'm just painting the top layer of a very detailed sculpture, which makes it easy to paint and honestly really fun to paint. When I got to the darker skeleton on the left, I'm adding the red directly on top of the black base coat, and you're still going to be able to see the color, but as you see, it's going to be darker, just as it appeared in my reference. As I said, I may add some more paint or some more details later on, but I think this is going to give us a good starting point to see if they are looking right through the window scene. And at this point, they're popping out a lot more, and I do feel like the neon effect is working even without any lights back there. I fit the window in place and I liked how you could see everybody, especially from different angles. I did put the furniture back in place as well. I like to get as many details as I have in there just so I can check anything and hopefully foresee any problems that might arise. I couldn't help myself. I had to get some kind of light source in there. Obviously it will be an LED later on, but right now I'm just adding an entire giant flashlight so we can see how it might look once the window is closed up and there's lighting from behind. And I am already loving it so much. I think it's such a fun detail. It's so Beetlejuice. And I just have to say thank you again to Matthew for providing these characters. I think it adds so much more that they are 3D rather than just printing a photo and putting it behind the window. It really does look like they're waiting out there for their appointment with Juno. So that's all I had time for in this video. I will leave you with a final look at everything that was completed for this part of the project, and then I'll be back to tell you what steps are coming up next. So that's all I have for you in today's episode. Since the office is filling up with furniture quite quickly, I think the next thing I'm going to create are the 3 football players because they are going to take up quite a bit of room. There's some other furniture that I think might be helpful, but I don't want to make it until I'm sure that all the dolls are going to fit. Juno has a place at her desk, so I know she's going to fit, but I need to fit 3 other rather buff dolls into the space. So right as this video ends, I'm going to be starting that project. And hopefully it won't be as many weeks for me to get it done. I am so excited to make the football players. I don't know why, but I am genuinely, I think they might end up being my favorite part of the whole scene. I can't wait. So let me know if you enjoyed this video, what your favorite detail was, or if you plan to make a handbook of your own. I hope you all have an amazing week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. We will make Juno's desk accessories. We will make Juno's desk accessories. We will make Juno's desk accessories. We will make Juno's desks. We will make accessories for Juno's desk in a later video. That's where I am working on my Beetlejuice problem. My Beetlejuice problem.